In Asia, three of many religious philosophies have dominated the lives and experiences of women: Hinduism, Confucianism, and Buddhism. While different, these three philosophies have existed in tandem, merged, and prescribed the way that women should be treated and the role that they should play. Nothing like some serious mansplaining to last millennia. Welcome to Remedial Herstory, where we ask what happened to the women and put them in. In this series, we tell women's history from era to era from the perspectives of differing and diverse women. Women are half of history. Welcome to Herstory. In the Indian subcontinent, a religion known as Hinduism today was spreading. The fundamental principle was that the human soul was part of a universal soul, or deity, and that the final goal of humankind was to be unified with that soul. Beautiful. From its inception, Hindus worshipped many gods, including female goddesses. Hindus believed in reincarnation and that through the process of birth and reincarnation, humans would eventually progress to this elevated state. Good actions resulted in rebirth at a higher social position or caste. This caste system, which divided Hindus largely into 5 different groups, also legitimized gender differences. Being female was somehow a punishment for poor behavior in a previous life, and each caste had different ideals of womanhood. Like other spiritual traditions around the world who viewed women with hostility, misogynistic Hindu laws entrenched this patriarchy into the tradition. The laws of Manu, for instance, composed in the early Common Era, stated that embryos were born male, and the female babies were mutilated males produced by weak semen. Gross. It advocated for child marriage and stated a virtuous wife should constantly serve her husband like a god. I'm about to vomit. It prescribed a philosophy similar to the 3 obediences found in ancient China. It also argued that a woman could only achieve spiritual salvation through her husband, and also equated all women, especially during menstruation, with polluted lower castes. Although many now consider the laws of Manu outdated, much of the patriarchal ethos remains entrenched in Indian and other Hindu cultures today. Contradictorily, however, many Hindu deities remained female. Unlike the Jewish and Christian faiths, where all male god was elevated over pagan female goddesses, some of these goddesses were powerful, fearsome, and destructive. Were these just stereotypical tropes of powerful women, or were they feminist icons? Interesting question. One famous portrayal of the goddess Devi in her incarnation as Kali shows her standing with her foot on top of her husband's head. Powerhouse? Yes. Did it also legitimize male fear of women? Probably. Entrenched in Hindu philosophy is the idea of Shakti, or feminine power. It holds that feminine power is indeed greater than masculine power, and thus it needs to be creatively controlled. Nevertheless, it is believed that Shakti and the masculine entity Shiva are equally codependent, and thus Hinduism can also provide a great model of equality at a spiritual level. In China, the rise and eventual adoption of Confucianism by the Han Dynasty represented the birth of a uniquely Chinese culture that would last for millennia. But what was that like for women? Did the improved bureaucracies and emphasis on meritocracy extend to them as well? Nah. Confucian ideology emphasized moderation, virtue, filial piety, loyalty to your family, and covered up the authoritarian policies of the regime. For women, Confucianism was and remains a problematic barrier to women's rights and feminism, and is deeply ingrained in Asian cultures. So, who is this Confucius, and what was his beef with women? He lived around 500 BCE and was considered one of the great Chinese sages. He was a bureaucrat, a teacher, and a philosopher. He lived in a time when leaders were corrupt, not working towards the needs of the empire and its people. He wanted social harmony and political stability, grounded in trust and mutual moral obligations for China. Confucius's ideas were recorded as a philosophy, but one that has often been associated with oppressing women through subjugation to the male head of household, and even to their sons during widowhood. So wait, you change their diapers one day and they stand over you the next? Whether Confucius intended this discrimination is hard to know, but Confucianism and sexism are intertwined. Perhaps there's too much fire thrown at Confucius. After all, He basically ignored the existence of women in his writing. When 10 ministers came to see the king, for instance, Confucius states that 9 came. One of them was a woman. Why he neglected her is really unclear. Was he commenting on the unusuality of a woman in that role, or was he merely distinguishing men from women? There are only a few direct references to women, and one of them is incredibly hostile. He says, "Women and servants are hard to deal with." I'll show you hard to deal with. Come here, Confucius. It is from Confucius that we get the yin and yang concept that balances feminine qualities and masculine qualities as separate but equal. Feminists today reject this model as it has been used to justify women's subordination and exclusion from life outside the home. Yin and yang are starkly different. Man and woman have different qualities. Yang is strong, but yin is weak and yielding. Please. Have you met women? A man was honored for his strength, yet a woman was glorified for her beauty. Oh, stop. When a man can survive birthing a child, I'll believe he's as strong as Confucius says he is. Confucian philosophy meant that women lived pretty subjugated lives. Women could not earn money outside the home and were expected to leave their family to join their spouses when they married. So many baby girls were abandoned shortly after birth, a practice called infanticide. And this wasn't restricted to China. Baby girls in every region of the world faced the threat of simply being female. Female infanticide, by the way, there's no such thing as male infanticide, remains one of the largest human rights issues of our time. One ancient Chinese man recalled, "Even a poor man would bring up a son, but a rich man would dispose of a daughter." Girls in China who survived were given virtuous names like Chastity in hopes that she would live up to it. Chinese women had no control over who they married and had to live with. They moved in with their spouse's family, who selected her often as a strong mate. The old proverb went, "A boy is born facing in, a girl is born facing out." Confucianism solidified women's second-class status and culturally ingrained the prohibition on women's formal education. Women's education ebbed when outsiders gained control of traditional Chinese regions, but the persistent domination of Confucianism locked women into perpetual slavery in their families. One scholar wrote, "Few people teach their daughters to read and write nowadays for fear that they might become over-ambitious." Another wrote, "It is sufficient for women to know a glossary of a few hundred words, such as fuel, rice, fish, and meat, for their daily use. To know more can do more harm than good." I've got just 2 vocabulary words to say to that scholar, but they aren't new words at all. Analects about women in early text encouraged girls to be chaste and silent. It also provided guidance for parents. Keep your daughters indoors. She ought to be under your total command. You should scold her roundly if she is not quickly to obey. Remind her often of self-discipline and household duties. Ensure that she shows deference towards guests and that she retires quietly once tea has been served. Do not spoil your daughter for fear of her becoming unruly. Never encourage or tolerate self-destructive behavior for fear of fostering in her a suicidal tendency. Do not teach her to sing for fear of corrupting her mind. Do not let her loiter for fear of evil temptation. Oh my gosh, these poor Chinese girls. Living and teaching around the same time as Confucius was Buddha, the father of Buddhism. He too had a powerful philosophy that had a massive impact on women's lives. Buddhism focuses on personal development and attainment of deep knowledge. Buddhists seek to achieve enlightenment through meditation, spiritual learning, and practice. They believe in reincarnation, that life is full of suffering, but the path to peace is through reaching nirvana, a joyful state beyond human suffering. Sounds amazing. So where did women stand in all of this? In Buddha's famous story, Mahapajapati, Gautami and her sister Maya were princesses who married the king in ancient India. Maya gave birth to the boy who would go on to become the Buddha, but she died only 7 days after his birth. Her sister raised the boy along with her own children, even nursing him in infancy. But Buddha renounces his wealth and the world, living in poverty for 6 years. It is a wealthy woman who offers him milky rice, enough fuel to allow him to meditate. The story goes that just before enlightenment, the Buddha-to-be was overwhelmed by Mara, the god of illusions, and the Earth Mother, and washed Mara away with water from her hair. The Buddha is often pictured with a head down to the earth in gratitude for the Earth Mother. After the Buddha discovered the middle path and began a religious community, his aunt/adopted mother followed his teaching. Buddha improved women's status by emphasizing man's dependence on women, as woman was the mother of man, earning reverence and veneration. He also improved women's opportunities in education and spirituality, although this was a reluctant process. The story goes that after the death of his father, Gautama approached Buddha to ask if women could join the order as nuns. He refused his aunt/mother. Disheartened, Gautama and her many women followers proceeded to shave their heads and put on the yellow robes worn by Buddhist monks. They followed the Buddha as he traveled, even though he had said they could not become nuns. They persisted in living as they were already nuns, but sought his blessing anyway. By tradition, the Buddha refused Gautama's request 3 times. At last, one of Buddha's closest assistants, Ananda, offered to speak on behalf of the women. He was also, at first, refused. Buddha said,
"Women are stupid, Ananda. That is the reason, Ananda. That is the cause why women have no place in public assemblies."
"Oh my meanie head." Changing tactics, Ananda asked the Buddha if women were capable of achieving sainthood. The Buddha agreed that they could, but he still hesitated. Ananda then reminded Buddha of the great love and service his aunt had rendered him as his foster mother. Finally, the Buddha agreed. Gautama and the women who followed her could be ordained. But there was a catch. The Buddha said that women could be ordained only if they agreed to follow the 8 chief rules. The rules themselves applied only to nuns and clearly dictated that in every way a nun would always be dependent on monks and would occupy a subservient role to the men of the order. Even if a nun had 100 years standing, said one rule, she should bow down to a monk even if he had been ordained only a day before. What a jerk. Gautama had a big choice to make. Her dedication to the Buddha and her advocacy on behalf of women like herself is unquestionable. Most of the women who followed her were also widows with adult children, women who had very few opportunities for making their own way in the world. However, Gautama's acceptance of the 8 rules would cement the lower status of women within Buddhism for generations to come. Ultimately, she accepted the terms because doing so opened up new possibilities for women in India, even if it came with serious limitations. The nunnery itself was revolutionary for women. Most women in India were entirely dependent on men in their lives. The nunnery offered them something unprecedented: women living independently from their families in prayerful pursuits. Confucianism and Buddhism spread throughout Asia and merged in some ways, as the philosophies were not incompatible. In India, for example, women's status declined with the rise of organized monotheistic faiths. The society had been patriarchal and had a strict caste system, but the abundance of powerful female goddesses and the existence of female warrior class shows that some women were regarded with high status. There was a prayer for a scholarly daughter and admiring texts for female academics. Vedic texts reveal that women were honored and empowered both in traditional domestic spaces as well as in public spaces, traditionally dominated by men. Yet as Buddhists, Jainists, Brahmanists faiths expanded, child marriages became more common, and by 200 CE, women's right to education, selection in marriage, and other observable measures of freedom were withdrawn. The introduction of Brahmanism was the final nail in the coffin of women's ultimate subservient position. Brahmanism is the belief in one true God, or Brahman. In every part of the world, culture enforced the standard that a woman's sole purpose was rearing children. Those women who defied the norms did so at their own risk. Some were protected by class, others supported by men, and some found loopholes to exploit. But women who pushed the boundary too far, stood too strong, were denounced as whores and met with violence in the form of domestic abuse, honor killings, charges of witchcraft, or some other horrible demise. Widows in many parts of the world, no longer virgins, were expendable. Sometimes during famines, people would eat older women to survive. Oh my God. In India, it was common for widows to commit suicide to join their spouse in the afterlife. For what purpose could she possibly serve alive? These women, often child brides, married sometimes as early as 7, had never had any choice in their life. On the death of their spouse, they were drugged and expected to join them on the burning pyre. While it's debated how commonly this actually happened, it remained as an ideal death for a widow. By the end of this era, so much remained in question. Why did these norms develop? Why would women submit to these norms? would women in Asia ever be able to circumvent these norms? Thanks for watching. If you want to dive deeper into these questions and form your own conclusions, go to our website, remedialherstory.com, where you can find free, ready-made lesson plans, primary documents, recommended films and readings, and more.